everybody. Good afternoon. And it is afternoon. Thank you for being here with us at the Center of Teaching Excellence for another exciting, engaging presentation. This one by Dr. Catherine Riker here on, and we're so glad that you persevered through the cool, as I just checked, 56 degrees of rain. But we're here, and we are insulated enough. There's no rain in here, so we're going to go with it. I'm so happy and proud to introduce Dr. Riker, who's an assistant professor in the School of Earth, Ocean, and Environment. I'm also pleased that we're connected because she is a trained high school science teacher. We have gone through teaching certification for science, so she knows her stuff. She's wound up here at the college level, kind of similar trajectory here, researching how people teach and learn in geosciences. She's been teaching at the college level for more than a decade, and it shows, it seems like it, because I have sat in some of her classes also. So what she's going to be talking to us about, active learning in a large course, with lots of enrollment, she has done. So she walks the talk. So we're going to be in for a treat. Anything else that she wants to share about herself, she will do so. I'm going to yield to her. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And thank you all again for making your way through the rain. I was not aware it was raining when I left the building, so that was a fun surprise. Welcome. Again, thank you for the kind introduction. I'll share with you one other fun fact, just because it's the one that most surprised my students this semester, and that's that I do have experience juggling fire. So with that, and that's exactly how I introduced in class and moved on to. What I'd like to do is start by having y'all introduce yourself to those around you. I know several of you are already talking, but I'd like to give you a prompt for this. So I'd like to know, what is your experience with active learning? Which of these statements best describes where you feel like you land? I've heard of it, but I can't define it, or maybe I just wandered into this room because I saw there were snacks. I can define it, but I don't know how to use it. I've tried it a few times and still figuring out, or I use a lot of active learning techniques and hoping to expand my toolbox. So take just about 90 seconds, introduce yourself to those around you, and share where you land on that spectrum. So just to give you my learning objectives for this particular workshop, when I sat down to try to think, okay, what's going to go in this? The first one is tied to what y'all were just doing with your introductions, defining what do we mean by active learning. So what does that phrase mean? We use it a lot, you hear it a lot in higher education. What does that phrase actually mean? We're going to talk through some examples of how I've used active learning in a large intro geology class here at the University of South Carolina. We're going to look at evidence for and characteristics of different active learning practices. I have 11 different practices that I'll share with you today. And then I'm going to give you some time to think about each of those practices and their relative utility for your class, whatever your setting is. If it's a 60-person class, a 300, 400 section class, if it's online, if it's face-to-face. So taking into account whatever your setting is, thinking about maybe one of these practices that you can take back to that class. All right, so I'm going to open our first poll. I want you to make a prediction. I have 3 different scenarios, Professor A, B, and C. Each took a different approach to their teaching. Which one do you think produced the greatest amount of learning? I see that we have, let's see, now 16 responses, a few more still coming in. 94% of you going for Professor C, 6% going for D, no difference. In fact, the correct answer there is no difference. This is shocking to us as professors, because I think a lot of us think a lot very carefully about what we do in the classroom. We maybe do hands-on demos, we show things, we show videos, we take a lot of prep time, we organize our material really well. I solved a lot of problems at the board. You mentioned teaching math. I think about some of my math teachers writing out these really complicated solutions, and I'm there, I'm taking notes, but I'm not doing anything myself. It's all about what the students are doing. It actually has very little to do with what the professors are doing. Not to pick on math, just because I was listening in on that table. So yeah, there's actually no difference between any of those 3 strategies. What does have a difference is whether we're incorporating some degree of active learning in our classes. And so what do I mean when I say that? So I searched the literature a bit, Found several different definitions of active learning. This is one that I happen to like. Students engaging in two or more of these practices instead of or in addition to listening to direct instruction, so listening to a lecture. So doing or observing, the students are doing something or observing something, so that could be observing a demo that you're doing, reflecting or some kind of formative assessment, so something, a quiz, maybe a clicker question, a test, something like that, and or peer-to-peer interaction, so talking with one another. So I'm a big fan of what's called social constructivism. We learn when we talk with others or we communicate with others. When I can put into practice what I know and I can explain it to someone else, then I really find out where the gaps are in my own knowledge. And listening to someone else explain something, I can critique their answer that tells me I know something. Other authors have thought about active learning as a means for engagement. So some of us give really killer lectures, not gonna lie, right? But probably not as many as we think. Maybe. So I don't mean to say active learning entirely instead of lecture, but I think of it as something that is a really strong supplement and a way to make sure that our students are actually retaining knowledge long term. In this particular definition comes out of cognitive psychology, where they look at engagement in learning in terms of 4 different dimensions. We have behavioral. Am I shuffling papers? Am I taking notes? Am I drawing something? I have my emotional engagement. I told the story of Mount St. Helens erupting this week, and I tried to do so in dramatic fashion to try to engage my audience emotionally. That was through a lecture, through some storytelling. Cognitive engagement, which is often the dimension that we as instructors tend to focus on, is what are my students learning from this? And then agentic, do the students have a choice of some kind in the lecture itself? Do they drive the direction of the conversation at all? So those are just different ways that students can engage with your course content. And at different times, we may draw on different types of emotional engagement, or different types of engagement, rather, with our active learning strategy. So sometimes it might be more important to me to draw on that emotional end, for example, rather than the cognitive end, because that gets them in the door. Why use it? In 2014, there was a really big meta-analysis. A team led by Scott Freeman out at University of Washington reviewed more than 225 papers that talked about the relative impacts of active learning. They found 67 studies that looked at the percentage of DFW, or the DFW rate, so students earning a D, an F, or withdrawing from the class prior to completion. And they found that when looking at classes that primarily use lecture versus those that use some amount of active learning, they saw a decrease in the DFW rate from 34 to 22%. And that was across 67 studies, a little over 29,000 students. The other studies that were included in the meta-analysis showed a percentage score on an exam, some kind of standardized exam that the lecturer was giving. And they found that for classrooms that utilized active learning, they saw an increase in score of 6%. So we're talking about half a letter grade for students. And if you tell that to your students, this is actually on my syllabus, is why do I teach this way? Here's why, it's gonna get you half a letter grade better. Like, just come with me on this journey for a little bit. And most of them really by and large do. And you can see that this study was done across different STEM fields. We've got some wider error bars on some, including my own field, geology. There were only 2 studies included in there, so there's a really wide margin of error, but I suspect as more studies come in, that will kind of start to close up in line with the other disciplines. The other thing active learning does is it helps us close performance gaps for different students. So depending on your discipline, you may have differential performance based on factors that really aren't tied to learning. So things like gender, underrepresented group or minority status, socioeconomic status. A lot of these active learning techniques have shown to help us close the gaps between our student bodies. All right, don't turn it over quite yet. What I'm going to ask you to do is when I say go, you're gonna flip the piece of paper over. You're gonna get 1 minute to memorize as many words as you can from that piece of paper. I will call stop. You'll have a 2nd minute to flip the piece of paper back over, write down as many words as you can remember, then a 3rd minute to count them all up. Are there any questions?
And before you do so, it's the active learning practice description.
It's the pink and yellow. That was the one that, oh, well, Sorry to our online contingent, but it'll be 3 minutes of waiting, and I promise you'll enjoy the result. All right, on your mark, get set, go. All right, I have another poll up on Slido for people with the pink piece of paper. I'm going to ask you to vote in first, but first we'll see if the mouse actually gets the cheese. I'm going to play that again because that's my favorite animation. I worked really hard on that. All right, so people with a pink piece of paper, how many terms did you remember? Less than 10, 11 to 13, 14 to 16, 17 to 19, or more than 20? So let's take just a minute, give our folks with the pink piece of paper time to chime in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got 2 more. Does everybody have a device that they're voting with, or are we missing some? Okay. So we have 80% of you going for 11 to 13, 20% going for 17 to 19. Very nice. So most at B, the very heavy majority at B, a few at D. All right, how about those with our yellow piece of paper? So same question. Ooh, very quickly. All right, here we have a greater distribution towards the heavier end. So a third of people went for 40% of people went to 14 to 16. 22% went to 17 to 19. I don't see anybody with 20 or above. A few people in the less than 10 category and the 11 to 13 category. So what's the difference? Why is yellow outperforming pink? Give me some hypotheses.
The neural networks.
Neural networks. Can you say a little more?
Yeah, you got them grouped into categories that are easy to remember because you associate these terms with different concepts.
Did anybody with a pink piece of paper find patterns in their words? I'm going to share one of the patterns you found.
I categorized them. There was like a food category and then like an animal category. And then I didn't have that much time to think about it, but then there was like an other category and I looked at them like by category.
And I saw you writing down a lot, so I'm guessing you were one of our high numbers. How many did you remember?
19.
19. Woo! Close to our highest category. Very nice. So,
Yes.
so creating some groupings helped you remember those. Any other hypotheses or thoughts to share? Yeah, Alicia.
Oh, I grouped, I had the pink one, and once I saw that there was mouse and cheese and cat and milk, then I could tie those together, but I didn't have enough time to get everything tied together.
I have, when I ask this question in my large classes, I'll have them shout out predictions. And some of the ones I got are things like, oh, the yellow piece of paper might help you remember better. Maybe it lights up something in your brain to help you remember. This semester I had one student yell, the front of the room cheated. Well, they only had 2 minutes, and this is a non-graded exercise, but you are correct. There are categories in the data, and the alternate arrangement that our front of the room, the group with the yellow piece of paper got, it's organized into what you called a neural network or a flow chart, a concept map, something to that effect, where everything is grouped for you. So you didn't have to come up with the categories. Instead, they were presented to you. So we start with cheese connects to mouse connects to cat connects to cool and tiger, right? So the funny thing about this is if I asked you in a week, if I said, take a minute, write down as many terms as you remember, it's still the people with the yellow piece of paper that will remember more, right? And since it's really amazing, inside of a minute, we see a difference in performance from a really random set of words. We have not talked about cheese in class. This is a geology class. Like none of these words are things that have come up. This was the result of our data this semester. So between both of our classes, so pink, same organization, the pink group, we do see people who score in that high end, but a lot less than the group that gets the yellow. So we see a score shifted with the yellow towards that higher end. So I have my students talk through this. We talk about what do you observe. So you talked about some of the differences. Why do you think there's a difference? Throw out some hypotheses. And they'll throw out all kinds of goofy ones. And I make the point that, when you are providing some kind of structure to your brain, it's much easier for you to lock onto. So how is the pink sheet of paper, or what study technique do you think the pink sheet of paper is more similar to?
Reading through your notes?
I'm going to read through my notes again and again and again and again and again, and I'm going to have the TV on in the background maybe, and I'm just going to keep rereading the same piece of paper. Flashcards, right? There's no connection between them, but here's a word, I'm gonna figure out what the definition is, but I don't understand how these things go together. So this is an intro activity that I do in my class right before we start doing some concept maps to show them this is why we're taking the time to do this, because I know, and you've just proven for me, that this is gonna help you learn the material for longer. So some colleagues and I went through the literature knowing that, okay, this is great, we know what active learning is, we know it's beneficial, but most of us are practitioners, we don't have time to dive into education articles as much as Nate and I and some of the others of us would love to spend all of our time reading those. And so what we aim to do is to create a practitioner guide of different active learning practices that had some kind of research validation to them and a thick, rich description for how to do them, maybe with some examples that you could find online. We found 11 different practices, and we wrote a literature review on these where each of these activities has a description, how it's active, any research validation that's happened with that particular technique, what kind of pre-class preparation is required, what does the student's strategy use look like, what are the task characteristics, and then a summary at the end. So they're designed to be really short things, and you actually have them. We've given you those as a packet today. Sorry, I've already taught today, so my words are failing me a little bit. So what I want to do is actually go through an example of how I've used these in my geology class so far this semester, and I'll ask you to play along with a few of them. If you can, you don't need geology knowledge for all of them, but let's actually start with the pure instruction example. So I have a diagram for you here. In the top row, all of those are melon arcs. In the middle row, none of those are melon arcs. On the bottom row, what I'd like you to decide is which of these are melon arcs. So take a minute, minute and a half with a neighbor or to the group chat. See if you can agree how many melon arcs there are in the bottom rows and which ones they are. Anybody want to share a characteristic of how would you describe a melon arc? What's one thing that you would use to describe them? From anybody.
It has a tail.
It has a tail, or a flagellum, depending on what size you think this creature is. All right, anything else? Has to have a tail. It has to be blue. All right. And anything else? And it has a red dot or so, an eye, a brain. Sometimes I'll hear that translated as nucleus. I oftentimes get the question of, so is this a real thing? No, this is a made-up creature. This is one of the exercises I used during my scientific process lectures. So distinguishing observations and interpretations. So you made some observations consistently about what constitutes a melon arc, and you interpreted that bottom row to say that 3 of those are melon arcs. And I heard a lot of you say, okay, so we got 1, we got 2, and we got 6. All 3 of those are blue, they have an eye or a dot, and they have a tail. So this would be an example of peer instruction where you're working with a partner, explaining to somebody else how you got the right answer. I'll oftentimes pair this with clicker questions. It doesn't have to be a clicker question or a multiple choice question, but it's something that I ask them to work in groups on. This pairs really nicely with, sorry, I forgot. So this one, there is a correct answer, there's 3. Next one is a content question. Which of these images below best approximates a relative distribution of the Earth's core, mantle, and crust? And I won't put you on the spot with any geologic knowledge, but which, Michelle can volunteer in the back, which answer do you think students think is the correct answer? Anything but the answer, and that concerns me, yeah. This is actually one of the trickier questions I ask all semester, oddly enough. Even though it's a very conceptual question, and they've all absolutely done the textbook reading by then, right? No. So this one I actually use as an opportunity. I'll open up the poll results and I'll show them to them in real time. Most students initially go for big core, thick crust. We're sort of biased to think the layer that we live on is nice and thick. So they'll go for C, and then I'll show them the results. I'll keep the poll open, and then I'll watch all of them migrate to C. And then I'll say, okay, well, 70% of you are wrong. And it's a challenge. It forces them to go, oh, shoot, I am wrong. I just let myself be led by the crowd. And then they have to revisit. They know they can rule out C then, but then they'll start to discuss among themselves. So they'll have thought about the question initially, then they'll pair up with those around you, use that peer instruction to see if they can explain to each other the correct answer. And very quickly, I see them migrate to this answer. And I do keep the poll open at that point and visible to them. So it's a little bit of an opportunity for them to say, just because someone else says the answer is whatever, like push back until you feel like you actually have the right one. So the way I do clicker grades in my class, they are worth a small percentage of the overall grade. but if you get to 85 correct, you get a 100%, and I ask more than 110 over the semester, so it's roughly like a 75% gets you a 100%. So I can ask questions that are a little bit more challenging without students getting too upset. Or if they forget a clicker on a day, or their battery died, or their roommate took theirs, it's not a big deal. Yes, ma'am.
Do you survey your students before you start to see if they have access to a laptop or a smart device before doing something like this?
I do not. So I haven't surveyed my students ahead of time to see if they have a device or a tablet. I do let my students use either the iClicker or Reef, which is the app they can get on their phone, and I tell them if you think you're going to use the clicker again, it's probably worth buying it. If you think this is the only large survey class that you're going to be in that's going to require a clicker, get the Reef app, because it's like a $14.99 for the semester. Oh, I'm sorry. A clicker, it's a little device that looks like this, but it has A, B, C, D on it, so they can chime in. And I actually see their answers in real time through a little device I have up here. How many of you have used clickers in your classroom? About a third or so.
And I do Reef as well.
And you do Reef as well. Does anybody not allow Reef? Because I've heard some pushback on that. Yeah.
Our chemistry doesn't use Reef polling, because we have the general chemistry like group committee, I guess, has ruled out any use of electronics besides the hard clicker.
Any other various policies? Alicia, do you use Reef?
I have done it both ways because of fear state, you can just vote from your dorm room. But they have been.
Set the location on it.
Yeah.
Set the location. My room's big enough and I can actually make it at the perimeter of the room.
So you can geo-fence the room,
Exactly.
so unless their dorm is right next door, I won't get to it. I haven't done the geo-fencing, but I don't allow the screenshot to go to their phone until after the voting is closed. So they won't know from home which question. They'll see that polling is open, and yeah, they might get a question here and there, but I just let it go at that point. Any other strategies for dealing with those? Cool. Well, this the whole idea of peer instruction, getting you to talk to your neighbor, see if you can figure out what the right answer is really similar to another one that I use a lot, which is called a ThinkPairShare. These are arguably the two most common practices, active learning practices that we use nationwide in large classes. So you can just do this one by shout out. Which of those pictures looks the most interesting to you? A, B, C, or D? B. I hear a vote for B. So we'll go to that one. And I have my students, again, go through this process of observation and interpretation. Make 3 observations and 2 interpretations from them, share them with a neighbor. And so I've just given my students, it's pretty minimal, but I've given my students some agency in the class, so allowed them to have some amount of control over the class. You notice that I clicked on the picture, it went right to that one. I'm just gonna share with you, this is not necessarily an active learning trick, it's just one of my favorite PowerPoint tricks. Alicia's seen this one before. This now goes to the next slide, but all of the pictures are present. So each of these in PowerPoint, you can hyperlink images to places in the document. So this is like killer instructor trick if you didn't already know it. So if you had said, for example, C, then I can jump straight to C rather than clicking through all of them. And then to avoid clicking through all of them again, on every single one of my slides, there's a square in the lower right-hand corner that has no fill and no outline, but it's hyperlinked to go to the next slide. Or in my actual class, it's hyperlinked to go to the last slide of class that says, before next class, do the following tasks. So it always looks like I end right where I plan to. Okay, not an active learning strategy necessarily, just like cool bit of instructor wisdom, I think, to share. Other things that I do that are really quick in my class, I have my students write minute papers. You'll hear these sometimes called minute essays. This is an example of one. We talk a bit about the structure of Earth. They've had that ThinkPairShare question, or the peer instruction question with the core and the crust, thick core, thin crust, yummy pizza, or I don't know, lava, chocolate, something. So we've used a bunch of terminology that's frequently very new to them. They take 1 minute, or 2 minutes maybe, and write a short paragraph that uses all these terms, underline those, be sure to include what processes would explain these, and then kind of like we did with the cheese exercise, minute, 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 then I give them another 2 minutes to compare your paragraph with someone around you, make any edits to your initial paragraph. Is there something they wrote that you would like to include? And then I debrief with them afterwards, so I'll actually share my version of a minute paper. So that's really important at the end, is to say there are a lot of different ways to write this. Here's one example of how. So you're sort of breaking it down and debriefing with them at the end. Yeah.
I just had a question about the minute paper. So these aren't graded.
No.
It's just an activity.
Correct.
Do you find that most students will participate in this activity even though it's not graded
I
and
do.
you're not collecting it?
I do, which is on some days a little surprising, particularly in the class that's close to 300 people. Like, I can't exert social pressure on you by getting, have you finished your paper yet? And I still find that the bulk of them participate. If they're on a device, that's the most common, like they're gonna go do something else for a minute. But because I've preloaded a lot of my lectures with stuff like that cheese activity, like I try to stress to them, there's a reason that I'm doing this right now. We talk a lot about retrieval practice. Practice pulling information out of your brain strengthens that neural network. So it allows you to pull that information more easily. So a lot of them see it as like, oh, this is basically my studying built into class. So yeah, I do have pretty good participation. And if you don't believe me or you just want to see them in action, I do consider my classes open access. So I'll give you the times at the end if you ever just want to drop by and see if they participate, see if I'm lying to you. You can come by anytime. Yeah, other thoughts on the minute papers? Has anyone used a minute paper or a minute essay in their class?
Then it just more for feedback to understand what they learned.
Feedback on what they learned. Yeah, I've seen them pretty frequently used as another name from exit ticket. So to get out of the room, everybody has an index card or just take a scrap of paper. If you have a question, sometimes because it's a geology class, I call them muddiest points. What's clear as mud to you at the end of lecture? What's one question you have? And then I'll just have them put them in a pile on your way out the door. It's not important to me that Chris put in this answer or Stacy put in this answer. It's more, I'll walk back to my office and just flip through and kind of go, yeah, okay, lots on that one. All right, fine. And then importantly, I bring that feedback back to class the next time and I'll start with a slide that says, these were the 2 or 3 most common questions. And it's not even necessarily that I've gone through every single one, but I've gone through enough of them to kind of get a sense of the pattern. And then I'm telling them the feedback. So I'm telling them, you didn't do this for nothing. You know, I value your input. And then I'll spend a few minutes at the front of class answering those questions so that they know, again, they have some direction in the class. They have some of that agentic engagement. Again, you don't have to read them all. It's, especially with 300, you know, I can pick a random sampling of about 30 and I'll get the gist of what's happening in the class. I also use a variation of what are called lecture tutorials. The more common version of lecture tutorials are like handouts that you would give to students that they work collaboratively on. I'm trying really hard to use as little paper as possible in my class. So I post these to Blackboard ahead of time. If they want to pull them up on their devices, they can. Otherwise, they just take notes on their own pieces of paper. But I give them something like this. This is a feature matrix. We've talked about 3 different versions of what are called convergent plate boundaries that have slightly different features, but they're tough for students to figure out which one goes with which. So I do the first one for you. I tell you there's 1 with no correct answer, 4 with 1 correct answer. If it's a particularly sluggish day, I'll give them a couple of minutes to fill this in, and then I'll have them all stand up. I'll say I'm going to reveal them 4 at a time. Once you get one wrong, sit down. And then whoever's up at the end, I'll just throw like handfuls of Smarties or stuff out to the class. And it's more out of my own amusement than anything else. But sometimes it helps to get a little bit of a stretch break. So then I'll show them, okay, so this is what I had. Oh, look, there's our no answers. We never have volcanoes on this descending plate, guys. And I might highlight that. Sometimes I'll also do this as just shout outs. Like, anybody think they figured this one out? Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. So we'll go through them all. Make sure everybody has the correct answer before we leave. So this is, again, this debrief process afterwards. I'm not just giving them an activity, but I'm walking them through what they should have gotten at the end, and maybe explaining some of these that I know just from past experience or some of our more like sticky topics or things that people tend to get wrong on the exam. Those are really deeply embedded misconceptions. We also do, after that cheese exercise, this is a concept map that my class, both classes generated this semester. So we did that cheese exercise. I said, okay, in just a minute, we have this big difference in generally how our group performs. How much more powerful is this going to be if we have words that we actually have some other association with? So not just cheese, mouse, germ, cat, bread, tiger, cool. I can do all of them. But what if we took all the terms that we've been talking about for the last 3 weeks in plate tectonics and tried to organize them together? This is a bigger activity. But I give them a starter list of words, maybe 5 to 10 words, just to get them going, particularly if the student is feeling like that, like really wide-eyed, I'm completely lost, I don't really know what this exercise is about. Okay, start with these. And I say, if you're really, really well and truly stuck, just add words to that list. Even if you're not sure how they go together, just start adding to that list. And then they start building connections between them. I have them throw out words. After about 5 minutes or so, I have them start to throw out words, and I, on the dot cam, have a piece of paper, and I will start drawing the concept map, adding whatever they tell me to add, as long as it's content relevant. I've never had them yell out, like, I don't know, Rick and Morty or something, some random thing, but usually I can find a way to tie their idea in, and then I typed it up, made a neater version, and posted it to Blackboard after class. And then I use this when my students come by and say, like, I'm having trouble mastering the material. I'll remind them of that cheese activity. I keep copies of it on my desk to be a visual reminder. Remember when we did this in class? And then I'll encourage them with that concept map, start with everything but the theory of plate tectonics covered. Make a prediction. What's gonna appear if I move my paper down a little bit? Oh, tectonic plates, or the theory of plate tectonics emerged from Alfred Wegener's continental drift hypothesis. Okay, what do I know about Alfred Wegener's continental drift hypothesis? Nothing, okay. Uncover that section of the map. Oh, right, he was missing the mechanism, and it was plate rather than continent. Okay, I know that. Recover it up, recite it again, and keep going through that process until you can mentally generate that entire concept map in your head. So it's the same thing that you were doing with creating the categories for that cheese exercise, is it's now I'm doing it with content-related material. I tell them if 1 minute will get you 22 words into that, imagine what 5 minutes with this will do for you. Right? So I have, actually on the exam today, I was flipping through all their papers, and a lot of them have concept maps of material drawn out. So they'll get their exam, and the first thing they do is start just scribble. Okay, and this. And I see all the images and things that we've done in class kind of reappear on their exams. Even though they're all multiple choice, they know that getting this out on paper is gonna help be a reference point for them. And this is really quick. I mean, paired with the cheese activity, this thing helps them take me seriously, I find. Because otherwise, it's 5 minutes of, make a concept map. I'm like, I did this in 6th grade, I'm not doing it again. But if they know that it makes an impact in their learning, they're much more likely to buy in. And the students who are well and truly lost, they may sit there for a few minutes just brainstorming on words, but then they'll start to pull things together. I found this is really helpful too for a lot of my students who are English as a second language, because it provides some context for how these words go together. Because otherwise it feels like this is a bit of a word soup. There's a study that came out a number of years ago that said the number of bolded words in intro science textbooks is on par with the number of words we teach in intro language classes. So you're learning a whole new language and then how to apply it and what processes it represents and how it all connects together. So I tell my students, this is a lot. A lot of these words you haven't heard before, they're new or being used in different ways. I also use a lot of concept sketches. This is one of my goofy diagrams. You don't need to know what it represents unless you're a geologist, you'll recognize it. But this is something that I have them do in just a minute. Most of my activities are a minute or 90 seconds. Just a little bit of time for you to go do something else besides me lecturing at you. So in this one, I say, take a minute, make a labeled sketch to show the relationship of the crust, mantle, lithosphere, and asthenosphere at a mid-ocean ridge. Go. And they'll draw, usually they'll get like, there's a peak in the middle, it slopes to the outside, maybe they'll add the arrows, give them that minute, and then I draw that same just upper piece, the thing that I know that most of them will get, and then say, what can I add to this? What else have we talked about? And have them just popcorn shout out different things. And eventually we build this really complete picture of all the different processes that we've talked about. This is a summary of about a week's worth of material in my class. If you understand the processes that are present, you can recreate this. But again, just like with the plate tectonics concept map, if you're struggling with trying to figure out what features and processes are associated with this particular plate boundary, you can do this one at home. Draw yourself a sketch. Then uncover your notes. See what you missed. Cover it back up. Add as much as you can remember and repeat that process until you have a really complete diagram. And just like with the concept map, eventually they'll be able to recreate that whole sketch. And I've used these, I'm not using short answer questions on my exams this semester. I've used them in classes of up to 130. That's about my cap out limit for where I feel comfortable grading short answer questions. And about, I would say 20% of the exam for this material is draw me a picture. Draw me a picture of a divergent plate boundary. Draw me a picture, a cross-section of an ocean continent convergent plate boundary. And they just draw it. Draw as much as you can. And you get points for anything that you correctly add to the diagram. I don't have a finalized shape in my head that you have to hit. Yeah, I love drawing in my class. We use the whiteboard a lot. These are just some other ones. Excuse the dirty board. I come in after I think organic chemistry or something. They use the board a lot more. But again, lots of different material. It's written in super large font just because I do have a big classroom, so to make sure it reaches the back of the room. The other nice thing about these really simple concept sketches is we have, for example, we have this semester in our class, we have a blind student. And these are really easy because they're simple black and white diagrams. They're really easy to recreate with wiki sticks. They look like wax pipe cleaners if you played with those as a kid. So we actually recreate the outline of these things and give them to the student to feel as we're going through the sketches. And then we'll add little braille labels that one of my students actually makes out of cardstock. She sits with a pen and punches in the braille, and then we tape it to the different pieces of paper. So again, something nice to there being a very simple conceptual sketch, not necessarily, I'm not trying to recreate what's there in real life. Case studies or problems. This is an example of one I gave recently. I have two inland cities, Spurstown and Tigerville. You can figure out where I came with those. With the same population, experienced two identical earthquakes. One of the cities was devastated. One only suffered light damage. Take 3 minutes with your neighbors. Make a list of reasons why. This is basically a recap of our class where we're talking about earthquake hazards and why some places get devastated and others do not. And then we repeat this activity when we deal with volcanic hazards. Same two cities, man, really poor city planners. Not only did they build by a fault line, they also built by an active volcano, you guys. And poor Tigerville, they just finished rebuilding and whoop, they're out again. So why is it? Why were they devastated and Spurstown survived their second major natural hazards? We do both those case studies inside of about a week and a half, just so they remember the reference to that. Has anybody used Jigsaw activities in their classes? Familiar with that name, Chris? Yeah. The idea here is you break your students into groups. Let's say we have our 4 groups here. This is an exercise I use to teach hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, or hydrofracking, depending on which, I guess, media source you consume. So each of the tables here might get a different piece of paper. So you get a little bit of different information. So either something on natural gas generation, shale gas production, something about a town hall meeting, where natural gas forms, in this case in North Carolina. So your table is gonna read just that piece of paper, talk with each other, use that peer instruction, figure out, make sure you understand what's on that piece of paper, because in a minute we're gonna rotate so that, like a jigsaw puzzle, you're going to have one person from each of those 4 groups get together and make a decision about a particular case. So in this one, they're deciding on whether or not we open up fracking permits in North Carolina. Do you believe that we should? And so they have to use the information on all of these, but each person is an expert in only the blue, the green, the pink, and the white. So it's a way of getting a lot more information out to the class, particularly at a time where it's not really important to me that every student reads every one of these, nor am I going to test them on the knowledge that they may not have gotten. But I want them to be able to understand the bigger picture. So what is hydraulic fracturing? What are some of the risks associated with it? Why do we get earthquakes as a result? But those are all things we'll talk about in class. This just gives them a little bit more dinner table conversation to leave with. Yeah.
How does it work, like, with people actually moving in a
So,
large lecture class?
yeah, that's a good question. It's easier, I will say, in smaller ones where you have mobile furniture. It works reasonably well in the large lecture with the fixed movie theater style seating. The reason I color code these is so they can quickly visualize, like, you need to find someone with a yellow piece of paper, and so they'll look around. When I print these, I organize them in stacks that go blue, green, pink, white, blue, green, pink, white, and then I pass them out that way so that they can kind of work with the people around them. Jigsaw, teaching with models. This is kind of referring back to that Professor ABC question that I gave at the beginning, which one produced the most learning. It's not enough for me to play with the model at the front of class. The students need to make some kind of prediction and observation about it. Chemistry chemistry educators often use the phrase POE, P-O-E, predict, observe, explain. So make a prediction. When I turn the crank on this machine, what do you think is going to happen? Take 10 seconds, write down a prediction. And then observe what actually happens. And then if it matches, the reality matches your observation, explain why. If it doesn't, explain why not. So that's a really powerful, really quick thing to do with students. Predict, observe, explain. So in this case, we're trying to get students to understand that rocks actually do elastically deform before an earthquake. And so here, as I turn the crank, I've got bricks at the other end of this winch. I also have some surgical tubing in the middle. So as I start to turn the crank, the bricks don't move. Instead, you see this elastic tubing start to stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch until eventually, snap, and the bricks follow behind it, and that's our earthquake. This is an earthquake machine. Far less exciting than what they think when I tell them I'm bringing an earthquake machine to class. But again, it's not just that I'm doing it at the front of the room, it's that I ask them in advance to make a prediction, make some observations, and then take 10 seconds, explain what you saw to a neighbor. brag to somebody how smart you are by explaining what just happened with that model. Two other techniques, I said there's 11. Two that I really haven't used, I don't think they carry the same kind of weight, or they just are really difficult to use in the large lecture. Gallery walks, so this I think would be useful in a smaller class of 30 to 50 maybe. I've done it in classes that have about that size, but this is you put big Post-it notes around the room or whiteboards around the room, put a concept and have students rotate, walk around the gallery and add to those. So sometimes I'll give them stacks of Post-its to add to ideas. Sometimes I'll do this for exam prep, let them write their own exam questions or what are you stuck on. With 300 people in the room, I don't find that this one's a practical kind of thing for me. And then role playing, it's fun, but I found that I've done it once in a class of 100 and it worked reasonably well. This is a section of the script that we used, mimicking the earthquake that happened at L'Aquila in Italy several years ago that ended up with some scientists being sued for manslaughter. So they go through the role-playing exercise where they're a little bit more emotionally engaged. I liked using it in that particular class because it was a class for elementary teachers and it was an activity that they could then take to their classes, but I don't use role-playing so much in my current large classes. Part of the reason for that is practical. Part of it is because these two strategies have the lowest amount of research validation that we found as we were going through our literature review. So on your desks or somewhere in your stack of paper, there's a single sheet that has a bunch of tables on it. Each of the 11 strategies, our team went through and evaluated from low to high, what is the efficacy of it, and then what is its utility? So how much time is it going to take me to prep this thing? A role-playing exercise takes me a long time to develop, and there's not a lot of support for it, so I'm not going to put my time into that. ThinkPairShare takes me about 20 seconds and about 2 minutes of class time. I'll do those all day long. So we kind of evaluated those based on our collective team's experience, and then we summed them up to give each of those 11 strategies a score, and the higher the score, the more useful we generally found it, and the more research evidence it had supporting it. So you can see I went in order there with the gallery walks and role-playing coming in at the end. So what I want to spend the rest of our time doing, we have about 20 minutes left, right? Yeah, oh, perfect, 20 minutes. So I'd like you to pick one of those strategies that excited you or you said, yeah, I can totally do that. There's another packet on your table that has, oops, not that one, that has a longer description of each of these activities. So this is pulled from our article. I pulled out all the references just to make it a little bit shorter. So you have the description of it, how is it active, pre-class prep, student strategy use, task characteristics. So if you want to read a little bit more about the strategy in depth, now that you've seen at least one example, brainstorm how you might incorporate that into your class. And then after about, let's say 5 minutes or so of that brainstorming, share it with your group. And then I'd like each group or the online group to share out their best idea from their table, the one that you're most excited about seeing go into the classroom. Sound good? All right, so I want to hear a couple of cool ideas. Does anybody have a favorite from their group that they want to share, something that they want to try in their classes? Good one?
I kind of use the strategy of teaching these models because I was teaching map projection, like turn this 3D graph into 2D map. So I use the orange and draw a word map on the field, orange field, and ask a student to peel it and fly it out. So it's like they can give them the sense how the projection work.
Well, I love that, because then they can critique each other's models, right? Like, so compare who has the most accurate map and why, and then I could see, thinking about the different types of projections, that they would basically be describing the different types of projections that are present, but you could then like model them with an orange. Maybe even take a picture of the different versions of projections done in an orange and then put it up on the PowerPoint. I like that. Yeah, others?
I'm a historian, and one of the things that we're really committed to is teaching writing, but that's hard to do in a 100 to 300 person class. So I suggested maybe doing a jigsaw where each group gets a different primary source document, And as a group, they work through that document, and then when they get into their new group, they think about the different perspectives of each person and how it might shed light on what it was like to actually experience Jim Crow or Japanese internment, or from each person's perspective, and then have them write just a paragraph with a topic sentence, 3 pieces of evidence, and a concluding sentence. And it's teaching writing on a smaller scale, but also teaching how to read primary sources and think critically.
I love that. And it could all be done in class. You're not assigning 300 people to go find their group mates out of class. Everything's nice and contained, which I think removes some of the stress for students too. Anyone else have cool ideas to share? Were there any that were getting shared online, Michelle?
They're liking the jigsaw idea.
Like the jigsaw, all right. We're gonna see jigsaw techniques pop up all over campus. I love it. I want to make sure we have a couple minutes to look at our Q&A. So I'm going back to the slide of the Y402. Like my most popular, can I get an upvote please? And whoever did that, you got good Slido karma. Other active learning techniques that we can use in large courses besides iClicker and website-based questions. Hopefully we've introduced a few of those here. Like I said, I tend to put most of mine on the PowerPoint or through iClicker just because I don't like printing for that many students, just to save some paper. Incorporating technology in large courses without creating a distraction like using the internet. Quite honestly, even in our faculty meetings, I see people checking their phones. I've seen y'all checking your phones. Like, if we can't do it, then I'm not sure I can ask a group of 18 to 22 primarily year-olds to do it. So I don't worry too much about it. I do show them a study that talks about people who use devices tend to do less well than those who do not, that are handwriting their notes. But not only that, the spread of effect goes to the person behind them. Because if the person in front of you is on Facebook, you're like, what's happening in your feed? So I ask them, if you are on a device, that's totally fine, but please situate yourself towards the walls, or if it's a tablet, just lay it flat rather than holding it up. But otherwise, I just keep the class moving along, and I don't find that it's a major distraction. I don't know, any other strategies for dealing with technology distractions in large classes?
I just have a comment about that when we were talking about the physical clickers versus the phone. On the first day of class, I tell them, think carefully about who you are. And having your phone on the desk all through lecture, it's gonna be a distraction for you. Get the physical one. And I find that actually does work. They think about it and get the physical one.
Somebody asked about free versions of iClicker. So we talked about Socrative, you had Slido. I think, and I'm not totally sure, but I think that this works, if I understand, Glenn Garrett, our iClicker guy, he explained to me that once the 2-week reef runs out, that you can still use that reef access for attendance. You can't answer questions in class, but if you are just using iClickers for attendance, they can actually go online and they can check into the class. And I honestly don't know if that works. I think that it does. Because I have students that say, I forgot my device today, and they just check in. So I think they can probably check in and they get attendance. I don't know if that helps anybody.
I think it depends on if you want to use them with a name, like if you want to tie it to some kind of points or attendance for the day, because there are programs like Kahoot is a voting competition, kind of like ABCD, four answer choices. Mentimeter we looked at is really good. It's unlimited number of questions, but you only get multiple choice. Some of the others, like Meeting Pulse, you get lots of different types of choices, but only, say, 3 that you can disseminate in a poll. So like Slido, I gave 3 questions. That's it. That's my limit, other than having the live Q&A going. So some have, and then the other one that I've used in smaller classes, Poll Everywhere, is really nice, except that it has a free limit of 40. So I didn't want to use it in this because what I would be doing is advertising, hey, go buy this particular program. So that's why I chose Slido for this one. But yeah, if you have a smaller-ish class, or if you're just looking for a general response from the room, it's not important that everybody chimes in, then I think a lot of those, like Poll Everywhere, would work. Otherwise, Mentimeter, Meeting Pulse, the iClickers. Awesome. Any other? Let's Time for debriefing after an active learning activity, it varies. I would say at least a minute that I will book into it, but it'll depend on how much confusion I'm hearing. And I listen a lot in the class, so I listen for, there's generally 2 lulls. The first one is, okay, we don't quite know what's going on, and then the sound will boost way up, and then you'll hear a dip again when they kind of settle, and they're like, okay, we've got it, and they'll kind of settle back. So I'll listen for that lull. And then that's my time to say, okay, starting to wrap up, 10 more seconds, get your final answers in, then you'll hear them peak up again. And then we'll do the debrief for as long as it takes. If it's a clicker question or something where I have immediate feedback from them, and let's say 90% of them are getting it right, then I'll quickly say the right answer and then I will move on with my life and theirs. If it's something where only 70% are getting it right, I'll quickly explain the concept again. If it's less than that, then I revisit that particular slide. My goal is actually to have the correct answer be somewhere between about usually 40 and 80%. I feel like if it's higher than that, I'm wasting their time by asking because they already understand it. And if it's lower than that, then I haven't taught it very well. But again, the way that I score my clickers allows me to have a little bit harder level of clicker question in my class, or more conceptual questions. Anything else that's just bubbling to the surface that you feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't get this question answered, I'm going to die in class on tomorrow? Awesome. Well, I encourage you, take the papers with you. We also have, if you look up that McConnell paper, the Active Learning in Large Classes, that has all of this online. I think it's maybe posted to the website, or it's posted for the online people anyway. But yeah, that has all these longer descriptions in it as well. And if you ever want to see these classes in action, like I said, there's no reservation required for my classes. They're open access and they're large enough that anyone can sneak in. I teach every day of the week this semester. Woohoo! So Monday, Wednesday, Friday afternoons, Tuesday, Thursday mornings, in the same classroom in Jones 210. So if you ever want to wander by, even if it's with a cup of coffee and a cookie, you are welcome to do so. Right? With that, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it, hearing all your fun ideas.
Thank you very much.